And welcome back into A to Z here on Locked On Sports Atlanta. Make sure you guys give us a follow on Twitter at Locked On ATL. Of course, I'm at Mark Zinno, MarkZinno. Check out the entire Locked On lineup that we have here in Atlanta, building something great. So glad you guys could be a part of it. A lot of great shows here. Along with A to Z, it's Hitting Hard with John Chuckery, ATL Day Ones, Jarvis Davis, and Tanitra Batiste. Don't forget about Locked On Hawks, Locked On Falcons, and our Braves postcast with Grant McCauley. You just heard me mention Locked On Falcons, and now let's welcome in from Locked On Falcons, our good friend Aaron Freeman, as he joins us here on A to Z to recap the NFL draft. All right, I just said a moment ago, I thought it was a good draft. I didn't think it was anything spectacular. I think generally on the whole, people would feel a lot more excited about this draft had they got a pass rusher in the first round. I think they'd feel a lot more excited if they had an offensive tackle in the first round. But we are here with Drake London in the first round and a wide receiver. And I think they addressed several positions of need across the board. We'll get to quarterback in a minute, but on the whole, generally, how do you feel like they did with the draft?
I think they drafted some good players, right? And that's kind of the low bar that the Falcons have to clear just to get some good players in the building. I think these are a collection of players that could certainly be some impact guys at some key positions in a couple of years. Obviously, several of these guys will probably play a lot this year. I don't know if that's going to really move the needle for the team in 2022, but certainly once you start to see those guys start to develop in 2023 and 2024 and beyond, I think there's a chance that we can look back at this draft class and say it's one of the better ones the Falcons have had in the last decade.
A moment ago about the undrafted free agent, everybody else, like find a couple of those diamonds in the rough that end up being viable options just because they need so many things. And I think a lot of those guys are going to get a chance. They'll get a chance to at least make the roster, a full chance to make the roster. And if they're on the roster, they'll get a chance to play. Now, that said, beyond Drake London, you know, in round two, they get Arnold. Ebiketie. It takes me a second to remember his name. Arnold Ebiketie from Penn State. Reaction to him. And I think in general, forever we'll be comparing, did they pass on Jermaine Johnson for Ebiketie? Was that the right move? And how does that work out? Like, that'll be the whole thing.
Yeah, I think Ebiketie's a really good player. I think he's certainly probably day one is the Falcons' best pass rusher immediately. That probably could have been said of probably any of the pass rushers they could have taken in the first couple of rounds. So I think he has the potential to grow into a really good player. I was recently comparing him on Locked On Falcons that, like, when you look at him athletically, there's similarities between him and, say, a Brian Burns type of player. I don't think he's quite to the same degree, the same pedigree coming into the league. But certainly if the Falcons can develop him, and he's working with our guy Chuck Smith, you know, I think there's a chance that he can be a really good player and potentially an alpha pass rusher for this team, which desperately needs someone to step in that role, because it's been 8 years since John Abraham was here, more years since they had that type of player. And I think Ebiketie has that type of potential, but obviously everything hinges on the Falcons being able to maximize it and develop him.
All right. And the other pass rusher that they went and got, which everybody is obviously familiar with. I mean, you know, how much Montana State football you watch, really. I mean, you know, Troy Anderson, a linebacker of need. They don't have a lot of quality linebackers on this roster. Deion Jones is a huge question mark, but they lose Fourier, and now you're in a situation where you just have a void there. So this was more of a necessity, but what do we really know about anybody from Montana State, right?
Yeah, I think it'll be interesting to see how the Falcons fit Anderson into the mold, because he's a good athlete, tested extremely well at the combine, has that same sort of sideline to sideline range and speed, and has coverage potential. And you're looking at a kind of a similar player to Deion Jones in that regard. And the question marks around Troy Anderson is, his ability to play downhill against the run, his ability to deal with blockers on the second level, trying to, avoid and shed those 300-pound offensive linemen as they climb to the second level. That was a major problem for Deion Jones, as well as several other linebackers the Falcons have had the last couple of years. So I don't think Anderson, as a player, is really changing the math on that. But again, it gets down to, can they develop him? If he adds value to their coverage units, I think that'll be a plus for them. And, Deion Jones, I know, has been much maligned in the last couple of years because of some down years, but it wasn't that long ago that Deion Jones was actually a pretty good player for the Falcons.
Yeah, well, I mean, remember when he came out, he was probably one of the better cover linebackers in the league in his first 2 years. That was what he was really good at in Dan Quinn's defense. And, Yeah, much maligned because his play has stunk the last 2 years. I mean, that's just what it boils down to. I mean, objectively, I don't think there's any other way to phrase it. Once the guy got paid, it all kind of just went as far as his play is concerned. That happens, again, it's part of, life in the NFL, so to speak. All right. Again, hold off on the quarterback. We're going to get to that in a minute. But of the rest of the picks, rather, whether it's the pass rusher Malone, Allgeier, the two Georgia players, I mean, what did you make? Which guys kind of pique your interest the most at this point?
Well, I mean, for me, Algiers probably the most interesting, and especially in light of the Falcons cutting Mike Davis this morning. Now he's got a real opportunity to come in and do some things. I wasn't that impressed with him as a player at BYU. I think he was very productive and certainly a player that can play in the NFL and probably be like a role player type of player. But I wasn't like blown away, like, oh, this guy's definitely going to be a lead tailback in the NFL. He just kind of feels similar to the running backs the Falcons have drafted in recent years, like Ito Smith and Brian Hill and Quadri Olson, a guy that can add depth and maybe contribute off the bench. But now with kind of a pretty significant void at the running back position, with Mike Davis's release in terms of, who was actually getting the ball last year. It was basically him and Patterson being a 1-2 punch. There's a void there. And so maybe potentially Algier can fill that moving forward. So he's probably the one interesting guys. I think the rest of the guys are just kind of role players.
I actually was semi-excited about the running back. I was watching some of his highlights on YouTube and everything and just watching him play. And then you listed off the list of all the running backs the Falcons have drafted. I go, you're right. He is exactly like those guys, and they all stink. You just ruined it for me, Aaron. You just absolutely ruined it for me. Brian Hill and Ito Smith. Ito Smith was smaller than me, bro. Like, they put an NFL running back on the roster that's my size. Do better. Do better overall. Anyway, okay.
It's what I'm known for, is ruining the things that people get excited for with the Falcons.
Hey, listen, anybody who listens to this show knows that their day gets ruined on a routine basis. But we still appreciate you. Thank you very much for tuning in. And I'm curious about Justin Shaffer and what the plan is for him. And forget the Georgia connection. We blow that thing out of proportion way too much. But there is a need for a guard on this team. And I don't think the plan is to plug and play him initially, but likelihood he could be playing on this offensive line that's still 60% is not locked down by any stretch of the imagination.
Yeah, I mean, Schaefer is an interesting player because when I watched him at Georgia, I was like, I don't know if he's that good. Like he's kind of the weaker links of that championship caliber roster. And so like it just feels like you're throwing a very similar player at Jalen Mayfield to push him, which is a guy that's known for his toughness and his competitiveness, but may have the athletic limitations and the scheme limitations to be a successful NFL player. So I don't know if, I guess it's a harsh way of saying it, but I don't know if two wrongs make a right for the Falcons at that left guard competition. So it'll be interesting to see if the Falcons, maybe go out this summer and try to bring in a veteran player that's maybe a little bit more proven at that position to come in and really give both of those guys a run at their money, or are they just content to hope that, through the power of competition, one of these guys will emerge into a decent NFL player?
All right. Desmond Ridder, 82nd selection overall in the third round. The Falcons get their quarterback. And that's a wrong way for me to phrase it in reality, right? Falcons get their quarterback because that's putting a lot more emphasis on somebody who is a 82nd pick overall in the draft. Now, that said, and I said this on Friday, and obviously you listen because you listen to A to Z every day, as everybody else does. But that said, I demanded that they take a quarterback on day 2 because it only made sense after taking the wide receiver. Go full on counterculture. At least get the guy that theoretically is going to be throwing in passes for the next 5 years and for the next 4 years of Kyle Pitts, because it doesn't make any sense to draft those two guys in back-to-back years, have no offensive line, change quarterbacks after another year, and then try to find, by year 3 of Drake London on the team, in year 4 of Kyle Pitts, any sense of stability. Like, you don't get a good sense of what those guys can be as far as their fifth-year option is concerned, because you've had so much change in the offense and in personnel. At least now with Desmond Ridder here, there's a sense they can start to work together. There's a sense that those guys can be in meeting rooms together and talk and connect and, start to build some foundation, even if Ridder doesn't play. So I'm glad that they finally took a quarterback. Now, again, how much is he going to play? When is he going to play? Look, I would bet a large sum of money he is starting at least a game this year, whether it be to injury or any other reason, but they're going to find out, and he's going to get some live game reps before the end of the year. I absolutely guarantee you that, especially with all the quarterbacks allegedly coming out next year. But They'll find out if this is the guy one way or another. And I think that's the only thing they're charged with is to find out if Desmond Ridder can play.
Yeah, I think that's a good way of putting it. I think that's kind of the overarching mission for this season is, can Desmond Ridder play? And their goal is to get him ready to play at some point this season, because you want to find out if he is the guy. Because Zinno, I don't know how you feel about the Falcons. I still feel like they're probably going to be picking the top 5 this year, even after this draft class. And
You had
so
to
they're going
ask
to
me
be
what I thought.
I feel like they are going to be in a position where there's going to be some potential quarterbacks at the top of next year's draft, and they need to know, is Ridder the guy for us to pass on one of these quarterbacks if we're picking there, and go for someone like a Will Anderson or Jalen Carter, one of these big time defensive studs on the defensive side, and move forward with those guys as opposed to one of these quarterbacks. So you need to find out what you know with Ridder. And, I don't think starting one game is going to cut it. I think you're going to probably need to start him for like 6 to 8 games. And so the mission right now is to get him ready to play. And I think he has the skill set to be one of the more pro-ready quarterbacks in this draft class. The question is just going to be, is he going to an environment here in Atlanta that is conducive to quarterback success? We've seen a lot of guys last year that were much more talented quarterbacks than Desmond Ridder go to bad environments and struggle in the NFL. And that's going to be something that is going to be looming over the shoulder of this Falcons organization for the next, 6 to 9 months.
Throw him to the wolves. That's all I can tell you. Look, again, it happened to Tua. It happened to Jalen Hurts. It happened to Joe Burrow. It happened to Josh Rosen. Some of those guys could play, and some of them can't. Now, is the jury still out on guys like Tua and Jalen Hurts? Maybe, but they've played well enough that the organization is willing to stick with them and give them another full season. And sometimes, look, they did the same thing with Baker Mayfield, right? Threw him to the wolves. Guess what? They figured out he could play early, and then it sort of faded a little bit, but enough to commit to him. And then when they realized they had a better option, they moved off of him. And that's all you can really do. So, yes, they have to find out if he can play. And that is the only job that they have this year, because if you need a quarterback next year and that's the year to do it, then go ahead and do it. I think you said it succinctly. I've felt the same way for the longest time. We've talked about this prior to the draft, and I've said repeatedly, throw him to the wolves. Look, if your offensive line is going to stink, at least put somebody back there that can run, and Ridder can run. Right? I mean, he can. I'd rather watch him take off. I'd rather him do what Lamar Jackson did his first year and throw the ball sparingly and take off and run and make games fun and competitive and give your chance a team to win, as opposed to Marcus Mariota getting sacked 75 times this year. Like that. That's not just a recipe that is good for anybody. So I'm curious to see how and when they're going to deploy him. But I'll say this too, Aaron. Watch when the schedule comes out. When you see that bye week come in, I'd pencil the next game as the one that he's going to start. If you get 5 or 6 weeks, if they don't have a bye until like week 7, if they end up with a bye in week 4, it's probably not going to happen. But either that, look for their first Thursday night game, and whenever it is, where he has an extra 3 or 4 days to prepare as a starter, that's the one where you throw him in and he's done. And if Marcus Mariota doesn't realize that right now, well, tell him I've got some oceanfront property in Baghdad to sell him, because he's fooling himself if he thinks he's the long-term answer here. I don't care how much he knows Arthur Smith. That's just not going to happen. So we agree from that standpoint. Overarching thoughts, though, I mean, you're happy with the draft, and I think that, these were just the beginning steps of this process, but there's a whole bunch of wait and see left, right?
Yeah, it's I joke, it's a low bar to clear. Like last year's draft, it was Kyle Pitts, and that was about it. And now you just needed to get some good players in the building. And you and I didn't agree with the selection of taking a wide receiver in that first round, but they got a good wide receiver. They got a good pass rusher. They got some, a linebacker. They got a potential running back. They got some other guys that can be some role players. They got potentially a quarterback. So they checked a lot of the boxes. And so while I'm not going to sit here and say like this draft is going to make the Falcons into, a playoff contender, all you need to do is upgrade the talent level. And I think they were able to accomplish that. So mission accomplished as far as I'm concerned.
Yeah. And shame on Desmond Ridder for saying he's going to be here until they win a Super Bowl. Dude, just say ready to go to work. Like, you don't have to make look, kid, thanks. We appreciate it. But just don't do that to yourself, man. Josh Rosen said it too. I'm going to win a Super Bowl. Yeah, Josh Rosen isn't in the NFL anymore. Like, just stop. Like, you could just say, hey, I'm ready to go to work. Play with the chip on your shoulder quietly. You don't have to do it out loud for the world to see.
There you go.
All right, brother. Listen, you have a wonderful Monday. I appreciate the time as always. You can follow him on Twitter at FALCFANS, Falcons fans. He is Aaron Freeman from Locked On Falcons. Make sure you guys check out the podcast there as well. Thanks for the time as always, brother. Appreciate it. And we'll do it again soon.
Of course.
All right. Coming up next, the Atlanta Braves starting a big series with the New York Mets, and everybody's panicking if the Braves can't sweep and get back in the NL East. It's only May. We'll do that next right here on A to Z on Locked On Sports Atlanta, free on YouTube and wherever you get your podcast. Search Locked On Sports Atlanta.